In our last episode, we got our first taste of JavaScript. We learned about strings, setting things to variables. We learned about functions, which have inputs and give an output. We learned about string concatenation with the plus sign, putting two strings together. And we combined those techniques to create this li function, which takes one input, which we're calling text, and wraps that in two other strings, which happen to be these HTML li tags. We then used that li function to generate three list items. We used these three specific tasks as an example: download VS Code, install VS Code, begin coding. But what happens if we have a different number of tasks? What happens if we want to be able to call our li function for any number of tasks rather than kind of hard coding these specific three? Well, that's where JavaScript arrays come in, and that's what we're learning in this lesson. First, I'm going to extract out these three bits of text, these three strings, into their own variables. So I'm going to create a variable called task1 and move this string to it. I'm going to create a variable called task2 and move this string there. And similarly, I'll create a variable called task3 and move this string there. So this is really the same output at the end of the day. Instead of hard coding these three strings, passing them into these li tags, I'm instead passing variables and up here setting those variables to these strings. Same output as before. But calling variables task1, task2, task3, that is only going to get us so far. We really need something to operate on a list of strings, a list of data. In JavaScript, a list of data is an array. Let me show you what an array looks like. First, I'm gonna copy this first task and put it up here again. And instead of calling this task1, I want to call this tasks. And I want to set it equal to not just one string, but a list of strings, or an array. In JavaScript, an array is denoted by square brackets. So I'm going to put an opening square bracket to the left of this string and a closing square bracket to the right of the string. Now, nothing outputs when you assign a variable. So right below this, I'm just going to call tasks so you can see the output here. And you can see we have an array denoted by the square brackets, and it has one item in it. And if we want to put multiple items in this array, then we can just put that inside the square brackets and separate them with commas. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste these other items in and separate those with commas. So now I have a variable called tasks. It's set equal to this array, which has three items in it, all of which are strings. Now, instead of referencing task1, task2, and task3, what if I wanted to reference the strings within these arrays? To reference an item in an array, we also use the square brackets. So I'm going to say here tasks, and then I'm going to open the square brackets and put a number. So let me put the number 1. Now you'll notice that outputted install VS Code here, but that happens to be the second item in our array. Well, it's important to understand in computer science, everything starts at 0, not 1. So to get the first item in an array, you actually need to say tasks 0. So these square brackets with the number inside of them is referencing a specific index. That's what this number is, an index. It's referencing a specific index in that array and returning whatever's at that index. So in our case, at the 0th index, 0th, zeroth. At the 0 index, we have download VS Code. So here I could do tasks 1 to reference the second item, and tasks 2 to reference the third item. So here I have task 0, task 1, task 2, and those are referencing the items in this array. Now I can get rid of all of this code. Now that's pretty cool. We have our array, we have our strings in it, but we're still manually concatenating these three together. If I were to put a fourth task on here, that's not going to automatically output here. So how can we make this a bit more dynamic, where we want to do something for every single item in this array and generate a similar output here? Well, that's where the map function comes in. Map is a function on an array which allows us to go through each item, or it's called iterate on each item, and return a new value. I think it will make a little more sense when I show you an example. So if I go down here and I say tasks.map, I'm going to open a set of parentheses because map is a function and I'm calling this function, just like up above where I'm calling li. So what do we pass into this map function here? Well, you pass in a function, you pass in yet another function. Let me show you what that looks like. So up here we created a function called li. We know that a function takes inputs. We have this, it's called fat arrow, and we return an output. So I'm going to build up that kind of skeleton here. So we're passing in a function, we wanted to have an input and return an output. Our input is going to be one single task. What map does is it calls the function you're passing in here one time for every item in the array. So that means .map is going to call this function first with the string download VS Code. Then it's going to call this function again with the string install VS Code. Then it's going to call this function again with the string begin coding, and the same thing for fourth task. And so let's return something here. Let's say I wanted to, again, concatenate some text. Maybe I wanted to put the word task colon and then add the task label there. We can see what that has done is map has once again returned an array to us. We can see that with the square brackets. And we have 4 items in this array. They look like our task labels, but they have this task colon space on the front of them that we've prepended. So map allows us to operate on every single item in an array and build up a new array that has new content. So let's take this a step further. Let's analyze this just a bit. This function inside of here, it doesn't have a name. We haven't set it to any variable. That happens to be called an anonymous function, has no name. What if I wanted to give it a name? So I'm going to cut this and paste it up top. And just like our li function here, I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to make a variable and I'm going to call this, I think I'll call it prepend task. And so I've set prepend task equal to this function. Now I can take this variable name and pass it to map. And once again, we are right back where we started. So we have this function, prepend task. We're passing it into map. Map requires us to pass it one function. And it's going to call that function for every item in the original array. Now, are you ready for some magic? What if, instead of calling prepend task, this is just a function that returns another string. What if instead of calling that, we called our li function? So let me replace prepend task here with li. And boom, there we have another array, 4 items in it, and now we have our li tags, our HTML li tags that we've built up with this li function. And we can see that now 4th task is included because we didn't have to hard code how many times to call this li function. We didn't have to hard code, that there are 4 tasks. .map is going to operate on however many tasks are in this array. So if I go up here and add a 5th task, then it's going to add another item to its output here. Now, one more thing to point out here. Our initial version of this had this one big long string that it outputted, our HTML that we're outputting. But our new output with the map function is actually an array, and it has 5 strings in it. So what if we wanted these 5 strings put together? We wanted to concatenate them together. Well, there happens to be another function we can call called join. We're all very glad they didn't call it concatenate. Join. So this is an array. This array is output by the map function. Join is also a function on an array. So let me give you some examples. If I go up here to tasks and I say tasks.join and I call it using the parentheses, then I can see that produces one long string and it's separated by commas. That's just the default of how join works. Let's say I wanted these to be separated with hyphens or something. Well, right here I'm calling this function, but I'm not actually giving it any inputs. That is a valid way to call some functions if they don't require any inputs. But let's say I wanted to customize what these tasks were being joined with. So I could come in here and pass this a string. Maybe I want to say 3 hyphens here. So now I have all of these tasks and they're being concatenated together with these 3 hyphens each time. We can also use join on this array down below, which is returned by .map. And join, because it's on an array and .map is returning an array, I can just add this to the end of .map. Now I have one long string of all the li tags. However, one little gotcha, they are all separated by commas, which is not what we want in our HTML code. We want them separated by nothing. So I'm going to add a string here, but just not put anything in the string. It's going to be an empty string. So now all of the items returned by map are being concatenated or joined together to form one long string. So if I go through here and erase the code that we're not using anymore, we can see just how compact this code is getting. It might take a little bit to comprehend what's going on here, but there's a lot of power in arrays, having this list of values, in using the .map function to iterate over each item in the array and generate a new value. And then even using join to take an array of strings and join them together into one long string. So that is your intro to JavaScript arrays, as well as the map function, as well as the join function. We've used this to take our list of tasks and generate a big long string of HTML. Now I think we're ready to take these two worlds, the JavaScript world and the HTML world, and combine them together and use them inside of a web page. And that will be our next episode. If any of today's material was difficult to follow or you're having trouble getting it to click in your head, then I'd invite you to use Run.js to play around with arrays and the map function, and maybe even watch parts of this video Maybe even watch parts of this video back through just to make sure you get it. Well, I'm looking forward to the next one, and I'll see you there.